We live in a time when speaking has become an addiction. Everything needs to be said, explained, exposed. The more we show, the more we feel we exist. But deep within the noise, we forget an ancient and dangerous art: intentional silence. While most rush to justify themselves, to be heard, to be understood, there exists another kind of presence, more restrained, more patient, more powerful. It's the presence of those who don't need to announce their strength, because it's already felt, even without words. Silencing in this accelerated world has become an act of resistance, and more than that, an invisible advantage. Those who master silence don't withdraw. They observe, they read the game, they wait, and when they act, no one saw it coming. Few understood the human game as deeply as Machiavelli. Amid the shadows of Florentine power, he learned that governing isn't always about speaking. Sometimes, true dominion arises from what one chooses to keep silent. His sharpest words weren't in the advice he declared, but in the subtext, in the awareness that before the masses, appearance rules and speech often is just a well-stitched disguise. "The people are moved by images," he said. And silence, when used well, protects what's real from the distortion of others' gazes. While some expend energy explaining their dreams, others have already realized them. In silence, they don't speak of victory. They simply win, without warning, without announcement, without an audience. In Machiavelli's time, a wrong word could cost you your head. Today, it might not be literal death, but we still pay dearly for speaking too much. The difference is that the price now is invisible: lost respect, distorted perceptions, exposed vulnerabilities. Those who speak without thinking hand tools to others. They reveal parts of their inner map. And once revealed, control slips through the edges. "The world judges by what it sees," Machiavelli wrote. And those who expose themselves all the time invite constant judgment. Every unnecessary sentence is a crack in the armor. And silence remains whole. Every time you say what you're going to do, you're building an invisible prison. Those who commit out loud chain themselves to others' gazes. And if the path changes, the world demands coherence, demands justification, demands obedience to what was said. But silence, it leaves room to retreat, to advance, to change your mind without asking permission. Speaking too much also reveals your mental maps. It exposes your doubts, your limits, your logic. And those who observe closely learn to predict your steps, to manipulate, to counterattack, to dominate. And perhaps the subtlest of all, excessive speech dissolves your mystique. The extraordinary requires distance, and mystery requires silence. Leaders who explain themselves all the time end up seeming smaller, because those who need to justify everything are asking to be understood. And those who ask to be understood have already lost a bit of the invisible throne that sustains true authority. Look around. The excess of speech has modern forms and silent consequences. There's the colleague who never stops talking in meetings, always has something to say about everything, but over time, no one listens anymore, because those who always speak no longer say anything new. There's also the friend who turns their life into a public diary. Every emotion, every plan, every detail thrown to the world. And what was presence becomes noise, predictable, shallow, too transparent to be profound. The impatient negotiator who can't stand silence ends up betraying themselves, fills the void with concessions, gives away what the other hadn't even asked for. And the leader who responds to every criticism? They don't defend themselves. They diminish themselves. By explaining too much, they legitimize the attack and lower their own authority. Machiavelli would see all this as a grave strategic error, giving the world more than it needs to know in exchange for nothing. The silence we're talking about here isn't empty. It isn't absence. It's choice. Machiavelli didn't see silence as retreat, but as tactics, a sharp tool shaped by intention. There are silences that listen, others that impose presence, and still others that create shadows, so no one sees what's behind. 3 forms of silence. 3 paths to power that doesn't shout, it simply operates. 1. Silence that listens more than it responds. The fool speaks first, burns through their cards before knowing who they're playing with. The wise don't. They listen, and only then move. Machiavelli said, "The wise act in one stroke, the fool in pieces." Because silence gives an advantage, a subtle but brutal asymmetry. While the other exposes themselves, you collect. Observe patterns, understand fears, identify gaps. In a negotiation, those who speak too much negotiate with their own weapons and lose. In relationships, those who listen deeply understand the other's emotional game while saying almost nothing. And in any competition, those who announce plans too soon become predictable, and predictability is an invitation to defeat. 2. Silence that imposes respect before it's even understood. Machiavelli compared the leader to the fox and the lion, strength and cunning, presence and dissimulation. But there's a trait both share. They know when to stay silent. Authority doesn't shout. It's built in the space between words, in what's said with precision and what doesn't need to be said. Those who speak little but with weight turn every sentence into stone. Those who respond only when necessary project strength, not weakness. The world respects those who don't explain themselves all the time more, because those who don't feel the urgency to justify have already conquered a rare kind of freedom, the freedom of not needing validation. That's why the highest speak less, and when they speak, the silence bows. 3. Silence that leaves room to be read in many ways. It's not always necessary to be clear. Sometimes being ambiguous is being intelligent. Machiavelli knew that revealing everything is to bind yourself, and keeping the veil is to preserve the power of choice. When you don't clarify, each person projects something different onto you. Some see strength, others see calm, others see a threat, and they're all right, because you didn't provide an answer. Politicians use this with mastery, negotiators too, but it's in everyday life that this silence shows its strength. When you choose not to define yourself too much and thus remain free. Clarity is beautiful, but often it comes too soon and binds what's still needed to breathe. Silence doesn't just act as a tactic, it reaches deeper. It moves invisible layers of the psyche. There are moments when no argument convinces, but silence unsettles. It activates discomfort, the void, the space the other rushes to fill, and it's in that filling, hasty, emotional, impulsive, that the truth appears. The true masters of silence are almost never seen, not because they hide, but because they don't need to be noticed. While the world rushes to show, prove, shout, they simply do and win. Perhaps that's why Machiavelli was so misunderstood, called a manipulator, when in truth, he simply saw the human with rare lucidity. He knew. There's power in knowing when to stay silent. There's strategy in letting the other reveal themselves. And there's freedom in not needing to be understood all the time. Today, amid the excess of voices, opinions, and immediate truths, this silence isn't escape. It's sovereignty. If this resonated with you, perhaps it's time to go deeper. There's a silent path that begins when you choose yourself, truly. And if you want to follow this journey, subscribe, not out of obligation, but because it might be time not to lose yourself again. Silence has its own weight. It carries a dense, almost sacred presence. It doesn't need to convince, because in many cases, it has already won. before any word even arises.